Hello everyone and welcome to Heather's Happy Stitches. I'm Heather. Today we are doing more of the Jack Skellington canvas. So I'm sure you can tell that by the fact that the last two have been super late and I'm being really childish about the fact that this canvas I'm super disappointed in this canvas. So I'm like reluctant to want to work on it. So, but I am going to work on it. I'm going to do as much as I can. I know. Grown adult being childish because my diamond painting doesn't have the proper colors, even though it says it's supposed to have 310 and it is definitely not 310. So, but instead, I made this new drill pen. It's got a wobbly unicorn. I like it. Hopefully this fur doesn't get caught all over the diamond painting.
Story 8 of 30 Ghost Stories by various authors. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Sandy's Ghost. Accommodations for the night, stranger? Well, yes, I reckon we can fix a place for you. Have a chair and set you down. Thank you. Don't you find this rather a lonely place? No neighbors, no nothing that I can see. How came you to settle here, so far removed from other habitations? Well, perhaps it's best not to ask too many questions ter once. Beg your pardon? No offense was intended, I assure you, simply idle curiosity. Don't say another word, stranger, but come on in, we'll have a snack for supper. Polly, bring on some victuals. You're just in time. Polly at once obeyed. She was a typical Western girl, tall, lithe, graceful, and limpid-eyed. She was clear-skinned and high-spirited, too, and in this case ignorant through no fault of her own. John Barr's eyes scanned her intently, and a flush came to her cheeks. For the first time in her life she was unpleasantly conscious of her bare feet. It may have been this that made her stumble and spill some of the contents of an earthen bowl over the guest's knees as she placed it on the table. Her eyes flashed and a tear of anger twinkled on the lashes. She stopped, half meaning to apologize, but an oath from her father caused her to set the bowl down heavily and to hurry from the cabin. A moment later Barr saw a flutter of pink calico from behind a pile of rocks. Old Kit Robinson saw it too. Don't wonder at your sayin' 'tain't right. She's a smart gal, and a good looker, too, as should have been sent away from here to school ter be edicated. She won't leave her no 'count dad. I oughter be shot for cussin' her, but I ain't what I useter be. Settin' here and keepin' guard makes me narvous." Barr's eyes asked the question his lips refused to speak. Supper eaten, the men went outside and sat with their chairs tilted back against the cabin. Something in the younger man's frank face had softened old Kit into a reminiscent mood and made him strangely inclined to gratify an idle curiosity. The soft evening wind sighed through the branches of the tall spruce pines, and the declining rays of the setting sun caused the shadow of the rude home to stretch out longer across the greensward. From its shelter where he sat, John Barr looked out on the grand ranges of the Rockies, and wondered where in their vastness he would find the man he sought, the finding of whom had brought him into this wild and unforsaken mining camp. "Stranger, I've take a likin' ter you. You've been a somethin' about you that reminds me of some one I know, and you look like an honest chap. Say, do you believe in ghosts?" He put the question very suddenly, and a look of disappointment crossed his face when Barr told him that he did not believe in spooks. "Wall, I've seen 'em." A thought connecting the pink calico with something in the past came to Barr's mind. "Can't you tell me about it?" he asked. I'd like ter if you'll swar on yer derringer and never ter blab. Will you swar?" The solitary guest started to smile, but the smile faded at the thought of unshed tears in Polly's eyes. It might make it easier for her if he humored the old man. "I swear," he said, and he did. "Do you see yon old spruce at the turn of the trail in the cliff jes' above? Wall, that's the spot I'm a watchin' and guardin' till the owner comes ter claim it. I'm quick ter burn powder and purty sure shot. I know a man when I sees him, and I ain't easy fooled. Wall, ter begin with, I had a partner once, and he was a man, sure 'nuff. He was from the state of New York. I never axed him as ter how so fine a gent come ter diggin' and shovelin' in the Rockies, though ter myself I said thar was some good reason. He had light hair, and we called him Sandy, for short, and he was jes' erbout as gritty as sand. We was as unlike as any two fellers you ever saw. He was quiet like and steady, and I was sorter wild and reckless, and I liked mounting due most too well. Wall, when we had a little dust scraped together, we would divvy, and I took my share way down ter the station on the other side of the cliffs and sent her off ter the bank in Helena. But I allers left some hid whar the gal could find it. Old Sandy had a bank of his own that no one knew about, 'ceptin' himself, and every time we divided he'd carry part of it ter his hidin' place, and then give the rest ter me ter send ter his boy, that he said was bein' educated in some college way up in Boston. He seemed ter think a heap of that boy. Arter a while my old woman gave out, and soon we laid her away on the hillside. It was hard, stranger." Old Kit's voice failed him for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure and continued. "But when old Sandy, my good old pard, give up I didn't care for nothin'. We buried him in style. All the boys from round the diggin's was thar, and many an eye was wet. We didn't have nary a preacher, but the gal she prayed at the grave. For the life of me I don't know whar she larnt it. Reckon the old woman must have told her. Next mornin' the gal showed me a letter that Sandy gave her just 'fore he died. It was ter his boy, and she was ter give it ter him if he ever come out this way, and she got it yet. That same evenin' after supper, feelin' kinder gloomish, and like there was somethin' in my throat I couldn't swaller, I took a stroll up the gulch. I went on out to the top of the ridge of the big rock, and got ter studyin' where I'd find another pard like Sandy. All ter once I felt a hand touch my shoulder kind o' light once or twice. I jumped up, half 'spectin' it was Sandy, but it was only the gal. Well, I was all took back at fust, and then I got mad. 'What air you doin' up here?' I axed, kinder tough. She had tears in her eyes as she looked up at me and said, 'Pap, don't git mad, I was lonesome. I seed you comin' up this way, and I follered you, 'cause I wanted to tell you that Sandy said ter give his boy his pile when he comes.' 'Wall,' says I, 'you might have waited till I come back to the house,' and then I sent her back. Arter she was gone I sot ter studyin' whar in the world Sandy's pile was. I tried ter think where he could have hid it, but it warn't no use. All ter once I noticed it was plumb dark, and these surroundings ain't a healthy place for a man ter roam in arter nightfall, 'specially if he ain't got his shootin' irons on. I cut a pretty swift gait for the shack. Jest as I come around the bend thar at the pine, I happened ter look up toward the cliff, and thar sot Sandy. Yes, sir, he was him sure as you're born. My feet felt heavy as lead, and I couldn't move from the spot. I tried ter holler, but it warn't no go. Finally I gave a sudden jerk, and made a step toward him, and as I did so he disappeared. Then I made tracks for home, but I kept mum, because I knowed the boys would say that Mounting Dew was lickin' up my brains, and I would be seein' snakes and sich things 'fore long. The next night, somehow or 'nother, I thought ter go and see if he was thar again, and sure 'nuff, thar he sot, lookin' kinder sad and makin' marks on the rocks with his fingers. I had my hand on my gun this time, so I got a little closter than afore. But by hookey, he got away from me agin, nor did he come back. I could hardly wait for the next night to come around. At the same time I was on hand good and early, just as it begun to get dark, and the trees looked like long spooks a-stretching out their arms. I looked toward the cliff, and there he sot, marking and scratching on the rock with his fingers and looking sad. Now, this being the third time, I kinder got bolder, and I went a little closer and says, "Sandy, what's the matter with you? Didn't the boys do the plantin' right for you?" Then as luck would have it, I thought of something else right quick, and I said, "Or is it the dust you've hid whar you're sittin'?" Wall, he looked up at me then, and the happiest smile come ter his face, and all ter once he disappeared again. And since then I've sot here guarding the place till the right one comes along ter claim it. Let's see, what did you say your name was? Pardon me, I thought I told you. My name is John Willett Barr. Polly, oh Polly, come here, gal. What was Sandy's full name? I plumb forgot. What do you want ter know fur? She asked. I ain't goin' ter tell you now. That's my own secret. Come, gal, tell me ter once, or it won't be healthy fer you. Wall then, she answered stubbornly, it was John Willett Barr. At her reply the young man's face grew deathly pale, and he started up from his chair, but Kit thrust him back into his seat, saying, "Bring me the letter, Polly." "What are you going to do with it, Pa?" she inquired cautiously. "I promised old Sandy on my oath ter keep it till the right one comes erlong ter claim it, and I mean ter keep my word. The right one is here, gal. Thar he sits. So trot that letter out, and don't parley long with me if you knows when you're well off." Polly stared at the young man in utter bewilderment for a moment. Then, turning slowly, she stepped quietly into the cabin after the precious document. An unusual gleam of joy lighted up her face, and a suppressed excitement shone in her eyes. Under her breath she said, "Somehow or other, I felt he was the right one." Too truly, John Barr realized in that painful moment that whom he sought was now dead to him. That the father from whom he had been parted so many years was sleeping that long, dreamless sleep in the clay mound on the hillside, which marked his last resting place. As he turned to look at the face of old honest Kit, who had been his father's friend during those long years of forced exile, a happy smile lit up the old miner's rugged features as he pointed with his finger to the rock cliff near the old spruce vine, and said in an exultant, trembling voice, "Thar he be, stranger, just as I have seen him many a night, your dad, my pard, poor old Sandy." With an eager voice John Barr sprang forward, and the mountains echoed and re-echoed the plaintive cry of "Father! Father!" But his outstretched arms clasped only emptiness and the darkening shadows of the rapidly approaching night. End of Story 8. Story 9 of 30 Ghost Stories by various authors. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Ghosts of Red Creek by S.T. To the northward of Mississippi City and its neighbor, Hansborough, there extends a tract of pine forest for miles, with but few habitations scattered through it. Black and Red Creeks, with their numerous branches, drain this region into the Pascagoula River to the eastward, with the swamps of Pascagoula as a refuge, and the luxuriant and unfrequented bottoms of Red and Black Creeks to browse upon. There are few choicer spots for deer. Knowing this fact, a small party of gentlemen on the day before a crisp, cold Christmas started from Hansborough in a large four-wheeled wagon for a 30-mile drive into this wilderness of pine and a week's sport after the deer. The guide was Jim Carruthers, a true woodsman, and the driver a general factotum, a jolly negro named Jack Lyons, than whom no one could make a better hoe cake and cook a venison steak. His laugh could be heard a quarter of a mile, and his good nature was as expansive as the range of the laughter. The usual experiences of a hunting camp were heartily enjoyed during the first days of this life out of doors. But his cream did not rise until about the fifth night, when, from familiar intercourse, Jack Lyons became loquacious, and after the day's 20 or 25-mile walk, would spin yarns in front of the campfire, which brought forgetfulness of fatigue. The night before New Year's was intensely cold. The cold north wind of the afternoon had subsided at sunset, and only a gust now and again touched the musical leaves of the pines, making them vibrant with that mournful score of nature's operas which even maestros have failed to catch. In front of two new and white tents, two sportsmen reclined at length within reach of the warmth of the fire, while opposite them rested at ease the guide and the worthy Jack Lyons. Wearied with the day's chase, four staunch hounds, Ringwood, Rose, Jet, and Boxer, were dreaming of future quarry. The firelight brought out in bright relief the trunks of the tall pines like cathedral columns, and sparkling through the leafy dome overhead the scintillating stars glistened with diamond brightness. A silence which added its influence to the scene rested about the borders of the creek below, and gave more effect to the story of the veteran teamster than perhaps it otherwise would have had. "If de deer run down de creek," said old Jack, smacking his lips over a carefully prepared brewing of the real Campbellton punch, "we's bound to see fun tomorrer, for dey'll take us down thar by de old Gibbet's place. In daylight dere's no place like it, but after nightfall you bet you wouldn't ketch dis nigger thar." Old Jack was naturally asked why he didn't care about visiting the Gibbet place that night. Asking to be excused till he filled his pipe, the silence was unbroken till his return. He piled on more pine knots and commenced. "You know, gemmen, dat when de gunboats was in de South, we folks had to travel way back heah on dese roads outen de range of deir big guns. I was gauged by Mr. Harrison in haulin' salt from de factory at Mississippi City, and on der beach ober Mobile, and I had been makin' a trip every week or so. Dis back country road was neber thought of by de Federals, and we had good times 'long de way, no shells and no shootin'. De night, gentlemen, I's speakin' of was a Friday, dat yo's all know it's unlucky. Well, you see, I hitched up Betsy and Rose in de lead, and old Fox and Blossom at de pole, and takes de biggest load of salt dat de team eber carried. I starts out and crosses the Biloxi River and Hansborough just as de moon was goin' down. Yes, boss, dese roads weren't no better den than now, and de rain made 'em mighty rough when yer come to de holes. I sat in de seat whistlin', de crows is in de pea patch, and a thinkin' of Sarah Jameson, what was afterwards my wife, when I felt the off forewheel go croosh in a hole up to de hub. I'd made 17 miles out abo Hansborough. I did some cussin', and den went to de fence, about 20 yards off, and took out a rail to prise up the wheel. Den I saw I was at Mr. Gibbet's place. I says to myself, I'll go up to the house and get old Mr. Gibbet to give me a turn. I had gone by thar 2 weeks before and seed the old man. Now, gentlemen, yer listen to me, for what I's tellin' yer is as shore as Jimmy'll blow de horn on de last day. I walked up to de house, and dere I saw a bright light inside. It showed out fro' de windows, and I saw shaders of Miss Gibbet and Mrs. Gibbet on de window curtain. Shore, honey, shore. De front door was shet, and I steps up ter de gallery and knocks wid the butt end of my whip. I didn't knock loud, needer. God bless us all, gemmen, de lights went out like dat, and I hears up a laugh, ha, 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 how that set my knees a shakin'. I opens de door, and dere was no sign of anybody. I struck a match, and all de furniture was moved out, and de old red cuttins that I thought I seed was in rags. De whole family was gone for shore. I didn't know 'zactly what to think about them strange voices, but I started back to the wagon when it lightened, and bress God, there in the front yard was 6 graves jest made. Somethin' wrong here, said I, and I builds a fire by the wagon and digs the wheel out. Just den old Squire Pasture come along the road from Mobile, and he tells me the news. Old man Gibbet cut the throats of his wife and 4 children and shoots hisself in the head out in jealousy of his wife. They was all buried in the front yard, and the house was deserted 10 days befo'. Gentlemen, when I hear dat, dem miles make de quickest time to Mobile eber seed. And yous can tell me dar's no ghosts, but you don't catch me round dat log house of Gibbet's 'ceptin' sun's an hour high." Jack looked suspiciously over his shoulder into the darkness and crawled into his blanket, muttering, "It scares dis nigger eben." Story 11 of 30 Ghost Stories by various authors. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Grand Dame's Ghost Story by C.D. I don't know whether you ever tell your children ghost stories or not. Some mothers don't. But our mother, though of German descent, was strong-minded on the ghost subject, and early taught all her children to be fearless mentally as well as physically. And, though dearly fond of hearing ghost stories, especially if they were real true ghosts, we were sadly skeptical as to there being anything of the kind that could harm. We were quite learned in ghostly lore, knew all about doppelgangers, will-o'-the-wisp, blue lights, etc., and we could not have a greater treat for good behavior than for our mother to draw on her store of supernatural tales for our entertainment. The story I am about to relate she told us one stormy night, when gathered round her chair in her cozy sanctum, before a cheerful fire, we ate nuts and apples, and listened while she recited an true tale, told her by her grandmother, who herself witnessed the vision. It was a fearful night. The wind sobbed and wailed round the house like lost spirits mourning their doom. The rain beat upon the casements, and the trees, writhing in torture of the fierce blast, groaned and swayed till their tops almost swept the earth. Bright flashes of lightning pierced even the most closed shutters and heavy curtains, and the thunder had a sullen, threatening roar, that made your blood creep. It was a night to make one seek to shut out all sound, draw the curtains close, stir the fire, and nestle deep in the armchair before it, with feet upon the fender, and have something cheerful to think or talk about. But I was all alone, none in the house with me but servants, and the servants' wing was detached from the main part of the building, for I do not care to have menials near me, and I had no loved ones near. It was just such a night that Nancy Black died. What a fearful night for the soul to leave its earthly home and go out into the vast, unknown future! I spoke aloud, as rousing from a train of thought. I drew my heavy mantle closer round me, wheeled my armchair nearer the fire, and cuddled down in it, burying my feet in the foot-cushion to warm them, for I felt strangely cold. I was in the library. It was my usual sitting-room, for I seldom used the parlours. What was the use? My books were my friends, and I loved best to be with them. My children dead, or married and away, the cold, grand parlours always seemed gloomy and sad. The ghosts of the departed pleasures haunted them, and I cared not to enter them. It was a long wide room across the hall from the parlours, running the whole length of the house, and was lined with shelves from floor to ceiling. My husband's father had been a bibliomaniac, and my husband had had a leaning that way also, and the shelves held so many an old rare work that was worth its weight in gold. The fire, though burning brightly, did not illume half the room, of which, sitting in the chimney corner, I commanded a full view, and had been looking at the shadows playing on the furniture and shelves, as the flame shot up, and after flickering a moment would die out, leaving a gloom which would break away into fantastic shadows as the firelight would shoot up again. While watching the gleams of light and darkling shades, unconsciously the wailing of the storm outside attracted my attention. There seemed to be odd noises of tapping on the windows, and sobs and sighs, as though someone was entreating entrance from the fierce tumult. And as I sat there, again I thought of Nancy Black, the old school-girl friend who had loved me so dearly, and the night when she went forth to meet the doom appointed her. Resting my head upon my hand, I sat gazing in the fire, thinking over her strange life, and still stranger death, and wondering what could have become of the money and jewels that I knew she had once possessed. While sitting thus, a queer sensation crept over me. It was not fear, but a feeling as though if I looked up I'd see something frightful. A shiver, not like that of cold, ran from my head to my feet, and a sensation as though someone was breathing ice cold breath upon my forehead, the same feeling you would cause by holding a piece of ice to your cheek. It fluttered over my face and finally settled round my lips, as though the unseen one was caressing me, thrilling me with horror. But I am not fearful, nervous, nor imaginative, and resolutely throwing off the dread that fell upon me, I turned round and looked up, and there, so close by my side that my hand, involuntarily thrown out, passed through her seeming form, stood Nancy Black. It was Nancy Black, and yet not Nancy Black. Her whole body had a semi-transparent appearance, just as your hand looks when you hold it between yourself and a strong light. Her clothing, apparently the same as worn in life, had a wavy, seething, flickering look, like flames have, and yet did not seem to burn. "In the name of God, Nancy Black, what brought you here, and whence came you?" I exclaimed. A hollow whisper followed. "Thank you, my old friend, for speaking to me, and oh, how deeply I thank you for thinking of me tonight. I shall have rest." "Rest," I heard echoed, and a jeering laugh rang through the room that made her quiver at its sound. "I have been near you often, but always failed to find you in a condition when you would be en rapport before tonight. What I came for I will tell you; whence I come you need not know. Suffice it to say that were I happy I would not be here on such an errand, nor on such a night. It is only when the elements are in tumult and the winds wail and mourn that we come forth. When you hear these sounds it is souls of the lost you hear mourning their doom. 'Tis then they wander up and down, to and fro, their only release from their fearful home of torture and undying pain. I have come to tell you that you must go over to the old house, and in the back room I always kept locked, have the carpet taken up from toward the fireplace. You will see a plank with a knot hole in it. Remove that, and you will find what caused me to lose my soul. Have prayers said for me, for 'tis well to pray for the dead. The money and jewels give in charity. Bury in holy ground the others you find, and pray for them and me. Ah, Jeanette, you thought your old friend, though strange and odd, pure and innocent. It is a bitter part of my punishment that I must change your thought of me. Farewell, do not fail me, and I shall trouble you no more. But whenever you hear that wind howl and sweep round the house as it does tonight, know that the lost are near. It is their swift flight through space, fleeing before the scourge of memory and conscience that causes that sound. That tomorrow you may not think you are dreaming, here is a token." And she touched the palm of my hand with her finger-tips. "And as you see, my child, to this day there are 3 crimson spots on the palm of my hand that nothing will eradicate. Do not fail me, and pray for us. Jeanette, pray." And with a longing, wistful gaze, and a deep sobbing sigh, Nancy Black faded from my sight. "Am I dreaming?" I exclaimed, as I rose from my chair and rang the bell. When the servant entered, I bade him attend to the fire and light the lamps, and I went through the room to see if any unusual arrangement of furniture could have caused the appearance, but nothing was apparent, and I bade him send my maid to attend me in my chamber, for I could not help feeling unwilling to remain in the library any longer that evening. While making my toilet for the night my maid said, "Have you burned your hand, madam?" Glancing hastily down, I saw 3 dark crimson spots upon the palm of my left hand. They had an odd look, seared as though touched by a red-hot iron, yet the flesh was soft, not burned and not painful. Making some excuse for it, I did not allude to it again, and dismissed her speedily, that I might reflect undisturbed over the singular occurrence. There were marks upon my hand, I could not remove them, and they did not fade. In fact, their deep red made the rest of the palm lose its pinkish hue and look pale from the strong contrast. Could I have been asleep and dreamed it all, and by any means have done this to myself. I thought, but finally concluded that on the morrow I'd go over to Nancy Black's old residence and settle the question, and with that conclusion had to content myself until the morrow came. Nancy Black was an old friend from my girlhood, who had owned a large property in the town, and lived all alone in a spacious stone house directly opposite my home, and who, when dying, had left me the sole legatee of her property. When morning came I took the keys, and with my maid went over to Nancy's house. It had never been disturbed since her death, which was sudden and somewhat singular, and the furniture remained just as she left it when taken to her last resting-place. We went into the room Nancy had directed. I bade Sarah take up the carpet, and sure enough, there was a plank with a knot-hole in it. So I sent her from the room, and lifted the plank myself. And there, between the two joints, rested a long box, the lid not fastened. Opening it, I was horrified to see two skeletons, those of an infant and of a woman, small in stature and delicate frame. In a moment it flashed before me that I saw all that remained of Nancy Black's younger sister, a girl of 17, who had left home somewhat mysteriously years ago, and had died while absent. At least that was the version Nancy had given of her absence, and no one had dreamed of doubting it, her tale was so naturally told. Left orphan when Lucy was only 2 years and Nancy 18, she had devoted her life to the care of this young girl, and when she found her sister had fallen, she, in her pride of name and position, had destroyed mother and child, that her shame might not be known, and had lived all those dreary years in that house with her fearful secret. Round the box, heaped up on every side, were money and jewels, and a parchment scroll among them had written on it, "Lucy's share of our father's estate." I carried out Nancy's wishes to the letter, for now I firmly believed that she had come to me herself that night. To avoid scandal resting on the dead, I took our clergyman into my confidence, and with his assistance had the remains buried quietly in consecrated ground. The money and jewels were given to the poor, and the old building I turned into a home for destitute females. And morning and night, as I kneel in prayer, I pray forgiveness to rest upon Nancy Black and peace to her troubled soul. End of Story 11.
Well, we got a ton done today. That's all I can stands, and I can't stands no more. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And just remember, you are beautiful, you are amazing. Keep being you. Have a good day.